Hello and good morning, Gooners. I'm JC. Welcome back to Arsenal Analysed Live. It's been a short while since there has been a live show on this channel. What was supposed to be instant reaction to the game yesterday has turned into just a reaction analysis and player ratings this morning. The joys of having a family. Those of you who know will know. But nevertheless, we are here. We are going to react to the game. We're going to talk about it. We're going to run through the key moments of the game, key players of the game, go through my thoughts on which players played particularly well, the ratings of those players. And I want you guys in the chat, whether you're watching live, whether or not you're watching this back as a video, to interact as much as possible and get your opinions in, your ratings in the live chat, in the comments down below. And I promise I will get through as many of your questions and opinions as possible, whether that be live or when watching back. So please do get involved as much as physically possible. There are no wrong opinions within reason in football, and that's what this is all about. So if you are looking forward to this live show, do go ahead and smash that like button. It really does help the algorithm, get the show and the channel out there. And if you are new by chance as well, smash that subscribe button, because there will be plenty more of these shows coming to you down the road. And I do promise that most of them, if not all of them moving forwards, will literally be instant reaction, not a day late reaction. So let's waste no more time at all and get into the game itself. Before we get into the key moments, I'll give a sort of a brief overview of my thoughts. Do give a sort of brief overview of your thoughts over in the chat box, and we'll go through some of them in a minute. You know, summarize what you thought of the game in a few words. But if I had to summarize the game in a few words myself, I thought Arsenal played very well at the start of the game. We came flying out a very, very fast start, which was very similar to the game midweek in the Champions League against Lens. We really did blow both oppositions away in that sense, in that sort of first 15, 20, 25 minutes in both games. And Arsenal having to play some really intricate football. I think one thing that is now quite noticeable, especially in the Premier League, and it should be looked at as a compliment, in my opinion, that nearly all teams, barring maybe, you know, the top six, for example, every time we play a game of football in the Premier League now, maybe even in the domestic cups as well to an extreme, every single team is playing with 11 men practically behind the ball. They're playing a deep double low block, very, very compact. You know, there are at times where teams have so many of their players in that 18-yard box, making it as difficult as possible for, you know, Arsenal to break them down, that you could quite literally throw a blanket over the lot of them. And in some games, it is really, 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 really difficult to break these teams down. You know, Wolves really struggled in that first sort of 15, 20, 25 minutes to match the intensity and the fluidity of what Arsenal brought to the game yesterday. But there are other games where teams are able to match that, and they make it very, very difficult. And players like Martin Odegaard, for example, or the movement of Gabriel Jesus really does come into its own in terms of how creative they are, how much of a handful they are, how much of a nuisance they are with their movement and their physicality. And that yesterday was exactly the case. Arsenal's quality came out on top in that first 15 minutes when we got those first two goals, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And those were the deciding factors. Yes, it was squeaky bum time towards the end of the game, and there were a few mistakes in there as well, which we will talk about, because on a different day, you know, those mistakes could have had a very different outcome and a different effect on the game. Whether it would have been 2-1, I don't know, because Wolves this season, yes, they started quite poorly. A lot of them had them down as potential sort of relegation favourites at the start of the season due to the form that they were in. They're losing a manager before the season starting and O'Neill coming in. But they seem to have turned things around, and O'Neill and Wolves have picked up some really good results this season. Obviously, the key one being against Manchester City, of course. But they have made it very difficult for teams at times. And I did expect that to be the case for Arsenal yesterday. You know, I was speaking in various different WhatsApp group chats, for example, speaking with people on social media, and I didn't have the opinion that Arsenal were going to turn up, even though the game was at home, even though Arsenal had come off the back of a 6-0 drumming against lens, I didn't have the opinion that we were going to just turn up and absolutely blow Wolves away. You know, there is no such thing as an easy game in the Premier League. I did genuinely think that it was going to be a tricky fixture, and I was quite surprised at how things panned out in that first sort of 20, 25 minutes. And I think that second half, especially that last 20 minutes of the second half, it was more of the game that I expected for the entirety of the 90 minutes, but we only really got it in that last 20. And I think some of that came down to Arsenal making some of their mistakes, which are avoidable. And I think Arsenal needs to be a little bit more ruthless and a little better in front of goal. You know, we needed to have put that game out of sight early doors. We certainly created enough chances, especially just in that first half alone, to have put the game completely to bed in the first half. And look, don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these Arsenal fans or one of these Arsenal fans on YouTube creating content who rants and raves for the sake of attention, likes, and whatever else. I'm not one of those guys at all. But what I am saying is Arsenal do need to be a little bit more ruthless in front of goal, and we need to have that extra factor to go up a gear to completely, you know, blow teams away. You know, you have to look at it there. You know, you'd have to say that maybe other teams yesterday maybe would have blown Wolves away in that first half a little easier. 2-0, it's always going to be a bit of an edgy game, a bit of a tough game maybe. And 3-0 makes it feel very, very different indeed. But look, just before we go through the actual analysis side of this live show, I want to go through some of you guys' comments and opinions in the chat. If you haven't yet popped your opinion in the chat box, please do, and I will bring it up and discuss any questions that you may have. First one here is Judge here, nice and early, making a joke of Manchester United. They played very well yesterday, didn't they, against Newcastle? Unlucky. All the way from Florida. Worldwide viewers, as we know, Judge, Neil, and many, many others, not the only guys watching from outside of the UK. So really do appreciate your support. And I think Judge coming in here with his opinion, just basically continuing on what I mentioned with regards to, you know, expecting teams to play that sort of low block. And I think Lens, as he quite rightly says here, when you try to match Arsenal in how they play, or when you try to play it maybe a higher line or play, I was going to say free flow in attacking football, but Lens definitely didn't play free flow in attacking football midweek. But when you try to play your own game, I suppose, or play more of an attacking game or a higher line, there's going to be grass for Arsenal to run into. There's going to be open spaces. It's going to make Arsenal's lives a lot easier from an attacking point of view. And Lens is a perfect example of why maybe if you can't match Arsenal for quality, like a Manchester City, like a Liverpool, for example, why you wouldn't play that type of football. Ensman TV coming in here, saying that Arsenal had a good win. Thank you very much indeed. And then finally, before we move on to the analysis, unless anyone else does have an opinion they want to share in the chat box, Judge coming in to say that we do need to be more ruthless. We were unlucky with 2 near misses, which we are going to discuss, and a few others, but it happens sometimes. Just be grateful. We got the points, an additional striker in January, which is a very good point. A lot of Arsenal fans talking about whether or not Arsenal need to buy a striker or possibly a central midfield player for January. Gabriel Jesus certainly showing in that first half, maybe that first sort of 20, 25 minutes, why you may not need to buy a striker, because, you know, defenders do certainly struggle with marking him and being physical with him, and the way he kind of brings everyone together and helps everyone be better, I suppose, from an attacking point of view. The way he brings in the 8s from midfield and the way he brings our inside forwards in Martinelli and Saka, especially, well, he was involved in both of the goals, Gabriel Jesus, floating out from the left or the right-hand side, creating space, occupying defenders, and allowing others to kind of run into those areas to, well, create goals, which obviously were the deciding factor yesterday, which we will get into in just a moment. So speaking about the game very quickly, we've got FootMob here, just giving you an idea of the stats and the momentum of the game. We can see the momentum of the game here. You know, I mentioned yesterday at half-time and after the game that we really didn't allow Wolves to have a sniff whatsoever. There was an opportunity towards the end of the first half, and then obviously towards the end of the second half, which resulted in a goal where, it just shows that in the Premier League that all you have to do is switch off for literally a couple of seconds and you can get punished. It is as simple as that. And it doesn't matter whether you're playing a team at the top of the league or the bottom of the league or somewhere in the middle. You switch off for literally a few seconds just due to the sheer quality and competitiveness of the Premier League, you will get punished. It is as simple as that. So unfortunately for Wolves, they couldn't capitalise on their chances. Fortunately for Arsenal, Wolves only managed to capitalise on one of those chances as opposed to the 2 or 3 that they did have. And we only have to look here at the stats. Arsenal limiting Wolves to just the 3 shots on target. And going back to what we mentioned a moment ago, Arsenal needing to be way, way more ruthless than they are. Arsenal having a total of 19 shots, only the 6 on target. Gabriel, Martinelli's effort that hit the post obviously counts as an off-target shot. And Arsenal with an expected goals of 2.89 to nearly 3. And when you look at, there were 2 big chances that Arsenal missed in that first half, which could have quite easily have been goals, and it would have put Arsenal 3 or 4 up. And that completely changes the outlook of the game. And maybe Wolves don't go on to get their goal because they are proper sunk and out of it, morale low. But that is the nature of football. So let's talk about the goals. Let's talk about the first goal. Arsenal scoring within, I think it was 5 minutes. The goal came, Bukayo Saka on the right-hand side. And Wolves really did struggle at first, in the first elements of the game, to handle what Arsenal were looking to do out wide. So they did line up with a sort of back 5, if you will. On paper, it looked like a 3-5-1. But out of possession, Wolves were very much in a 5 at the back, 3 in midfield, and then just the 1 up top who was looking to apply the pressure. One or 2 times you would see, maybe someone from that midfield 3 push on to apply a little bit of pressure to the Arsenal back 3, which was the usual Tomiyasu, Saliba, and Gabriel. Zinchenko obviously tucking into midfield. But what they really struggled with yesterday was the interchanging of how Tomiyasu was playing, sometimes as an overlapping fullback, and then at other times an inverting fullback coming inside, which was the reason why, one of several reasons Arsenal scored that first goal, because Arsenal's wide rotations really did have an effect on how we broke them down. So if we have a quick look here at the tactical board for Arsenal, we can see here in yellow, apologies, it's not the usual orange. I thought that it would clash a little bit too much, but yeah, this is how they lined up. And as I said, they were in a back 5. This is, this is Wolves' back 5. Arsenal's usual 5 attackers here. Now, what they were doing initially is the fullback of Wolves as well as the winger of Wolves, they were doubling up on our wingers. So Martinelli or Saka, whoever it might be, would come really, really, really wide and look to be really, really, really direct. And they would have the fullback and the winger of the Wolves team would come here to double up on Saka. This isn't something new. This isn't something that, Wolves are trying to revolutionise the way that clubs play against Arsenal. This is something that a lot of clubs do. They've been doing it since, the beginning of last season, since Arsenal have started playing really, 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 really good attacking football. It's something that they've had to do to stop them from being able to play the way that Arsenal want to play. But where things changed is, again, nothing real new here. Odegaard would always be that supporting player. Here for Saka. On this left side, it's been a numerous different number of players this season. In this game, it was Trossard. What we would then sometimes see is maybe a central midfield player come in here to mark Martin Odegaard. And then if Gabriel Jesus came over, which is what he did do for the first goal, we would see the left centre-back come over here. So we would see a situation where there would be a slight potential overload with what Arsenal were trying to do. But where things really changed is when Tomiyasu enters the frame. In previous weeks, it may have been someone like, say, Ben White. Ben White never really comes inside. He doesn't play that inverted fullback role. Now, we've seen Tomiyasu at the start of the season He's played a lot on the left-hand side, playing as an inverted left back, coming into midfield and occupying that space that Zinchenko would play into. But on the right-hand side, he would constantly keep the Wolves players guessing. And it created an issue for Wolves where the central midfield player here, or one of the players doubling up on Saka, they didn't know which one of the two was supposed to go when marking Tomiyasu. And what I mean by that is when Tomiyasu went on the overlap on the outside, very, very simple. The fullback would track or the winger would track. They would take turns. Obviously, one would track Tomiyasu, the other would track Saka. Really simple, basic football, really, really basic football stuff, right? But when Tomiyasu came on the inside, it created an issue where was it the central midfield player that would track him and then the winger go to Martin Odegaard? Because then Martin Odegaard would come in and look to occupy this space here on the outside and Tomiyasu would come here on the inside. So what Arsenal were constantly doing is switching and changing where these players were played. It was a very fluid game on the outside and it was very similar on the left-hand side, not as much to this extent, but it was very, very, very similar. And it's how Arsenal managed to unlock Wolves on both occasions for both goals. Because what we saw was Saka came out here, very, very wide. We saw the two players marking him here, right? We saw Gabriel Jesus on the edge of the box with his back towards goal. Saka played a really intricate pass between the two players, which eventually landed at the feet of Gabriel Jesus. We had Martin Odegaard occupying this space, making sure that one of the several players out on this side of the pitch was occupying a Wolves player. And then Tomiyasu came in here. The ball eventually came into Tomiyasu off the back of Gabriel Jesus. Saka made an inside run and the ball eventually came to Saka's feet here. So what essentially I'm getting at is Arsenal had very fluid, wide rotations, which completely blew Wolves away. And it was exactly the same. We won't go through it in this level of detail now for the second goal that Arsenal scored, Martin Odegaard's goal. But it was exactly the same sort of reason for why Arsenal scored the second goal. The ball was at the feet of Alexander Zinchenko. He plays it in to Gabriel Jesus, who is in this position here. We had Martinelli occupying players again. We had Zinchenko who went on the overlap. He passed the ball inside to Gabriel Jesus, as we know. Gabriel Jesus ended up here. It did look like it was going to go back to another Arsenal player. I can't remember who it is off the top of my head, who was in an offside position, but obviously it doesn't. Zinchenko ends up with the ball here at his feet, and he squares it to Martin Odegaard in the inside 18-yard box. Now, typically what you would say on this left-hand side is that you would expect someone like Leandro Trossard to be there, given the wide rotations on the left and the right-hand side. But because of how deep Zinchenko is playing, he found himself in a slightly more advanced role. Let's be honest, we don't see Zinchenko in these positions all the time. Odegaard found himself in loads of space in that 18-yard box because Leandro Trossard was occupying the midfield player that was supposed to be marking someone in that area of the pitch on that left-hand side. So the midfield player from the right-hand side has obviously been caught napping. Odegaard finds himself in a whole bunch of space, which means Arsenal get that second goal and blew Wolves away in that sort of first 20, 25 minutes. Absolutely brilliant stuff. And that was pretty much the sort of tone set for the first sort of 30 minutes of the first half before things started to slow down. Obviously, Arsenal had complete control in that first half, barring a mistake that we'll talk about in just a moment. But if we have a quick look here, this is how Arsenal lined up from a positional point of view. Just going back to what I mentioned earlier on, we can see usual Arsenal's front five here. Saka, Martin Odegaard, Gabriel Jesus, Leandro Trossard, and Martinelli in this frame here. And we can see that wide rotation of Saka, Tomiyasu, and Martin Odegaard. And we can see how much, what I mean is, in terms of how Zinchenko and Tomiyasu played very, very different games yesterday. If we have a look at Tomiyasu's heat map, very much kind of hugging this right-hand side, you can see elements here of Tomiyasu coming in as that kind of inverted fullback, if you will. Maybe sometimes as an inside forward of how high he was playing. Saka very much playing very, very high and wide as you expect. And the same with Martin Odegaard. So really, really sort of pushing into what I mentioned with those wide rotations. If we have a look at Zinchenko, very, very different type of heat map. This is him occupying that left half space that we've often seen him play for Arsenal, playing a slightly deeper role, coming into midfield, playing as part of a deep double pivot, as we know. Nothing new here. Gabriel Martinelli, similarly to Saka's heat map, high and wide, and then Trossard as well, occupying a Xhaka-esque type space. He did very well. I'm not trying to say that he played a Xhaka role, so please don't don't think that's what I'm saying. But when you look at his heat map, probably not a role that you've seen him play too often. Quite deep at times, happy to do the defensive side of things. Very different to a Kai Havertz, for example, in that role, if we had him playing there. But that was the Arsenal shape yesterday. And just to kind of show you what I was talking about when Wolves were playing both in and out of possession, we can see that back five here, or when they had possession, we can see the five here. And then when Wolves did want to attack, that very much changed into a kind of three. And we can see here Nketiah being the sort of furthest man forwards, who was eventually rewarded with I think it was him who scored a very good goal in the game. So it was him who scored. And just very, very quickly before we move on, just to kind of show you how much success Arsenal had in this game from those wide rotations on that right-hand side. These are the heat maps of where the ball was for most parts of the game yesterday. We can see that deep red there on Arsenal's right-hand side. So certainly an area that Arsenal looked to highlight pre-game to expose Wolves, and Arsenal certainly getting their rewards nice and early in this game. So let's just take that off screen very, very quickly so we can discuss some of the other elements of this game. Some areas of maybe frustration where Arsenal maybe could have done a little bit better. First things first, we've got the first half where Arsenal had opportunities to kill this game off. I wouldn't say that there's any negatives to take from this at all. It's more a case of Arsenal needing to just be more clinical and more ruthless going forwards. There was an opportunity for Leandro Trossard, Arteta seemingly looking to be quite frustrated with him, especially in that second half, due to his decision-making, maybe not being able to sort of pick a pass a little earlier in the game, or being a little bit more decisive with the ball at his feet in that final third. And I would say that the first chance that he had in the first half, where goalkeeper bears down on him pretty quickly, great opportunity for him to score what would have been the third goal in the game. I did think he was going to tuck it away, if I'm honest with you. And that's where Arsenal need to be a little bit more ruthless. And to be quite honest with you, Trossard, prior to this game, I would say that he has been a very ruthless player, really clinical in front of goal. One of Arsenal's better finishers this season, really. When you look at some of the goals he scored in other fixtures, his finishing has just been absolutely excellent. But there were times yesterday where maybe he did need to be a little bit more decisive, whether it be taking a shot a little sooner or making a pass a little sooner as well, holding on to the ball at times a little bit too long, which ended up in Arteta getting quite frustrated. And then I think the other chance that was quite frustrating for me, at least, and I'm sure a lot of other Arsenal fans felt the same, there was an absolutely unbelievable counter-attack from Arsenal in the first half. There was a cross-field ball, which was a big switch from the right-hand side from Bukayo Saka. Martinelli in bundles of space down that left-hand side, coming inside with the ball, something that we're seeing all too often, something that the defenders are struggling with quite often as well. Him cutting inside and hitting the ball across the goalkeeper with that right foot. And the ball often nestles in the back of the net, but on this occasion, it hits the post and comes back out into play. On another night, it may have hit the inside of the post and gone in. But in my opinion, if either of those two opportunities end up in the back of the net, it's Arsenal 3 or 4-0, and the game is completely dead and buried. Even if Newcastle do get a goal back later in the game, in my opinion, that does make the game completely dead and buried. So for me, Arsenal certainly need to be far more clinical. They have been in most games this season. I'm not saying they haven't been. I'm just saying that there are certain games, and sometimes when you're having an off day, you're having an off day. You can't help it. But Arsenal, certainly, that's another level that you can see Arsenal going up by. And that's what excites me about this Arsenal team. Is it is by no means the finished article. And when you look at some of the chances that Arsenal had yesterday, and when you had a look at the bigger picture yesterday and how Arsenal could have killed that game off, those are the next levels that we can see Arsenal going up and into, hopefully over the course of the next couple of seasons as well. So those were my frustrations with the first half. There is one little thing I want to talk about that happened at the end of the first half as well. And that was Alexander Zinchenko being a little bit too casual in possession of the ball on the edge of the 18-yard box. It happened, I think it was 3 times in total in the game, being a little bit too casual, being caught in possession. The ball nearly falls to a Wolves striker. David Raya really alert to the situation. He comes out, manages to block whatever would have potentially unfolded. It could have been a goal before half-time. Completely changes the face of the game for the second half if we go in at 2-1. So really, really good stuff from David Raya, being as alert as he is. But sometimes Alexander Zinchenko, from a defensive point of view, yes, he's great at breaking the lines of his passing. Yes, he's great at sitting in a deep double pivot. Yes, he's great at going forward, but you just need to see that alertness for the full 90 minutes, especially at the back. Arsenal fans know all too well some of the troubles that we've had at the back during the last 10 years with some players, and we seem as though that we've cut that out now. But yesterday there were a few times where Arsenal were caught napping. And when I say Arsenal, it was I don't want to single a player out here. This is not what I'm trying to do. As I said, I'm not about that on this channel at all. But Alexander Zinchenko got caught napping on a couple of occasions yesterday, and I'm sure Arteta will speak to him about it, and it just needs to be cut out, because if we're playing against the Manchester City, a Liverpool or other teams, those opportunities, you get punished. It is as simple as that. And all that hard work in the first 20, 25 minutes is completely undone. So for me, it needs to be worked on, because at the end of the second half, I think it was around the 85th, 86th minute, exactly the same thing happens again in exactly the same place on the left side of the edge of the 18-yard box. Alexander Zinchenko, there's like 5 minutes to go. Arsenal 2-0 up, cruising, in complete control of the game. No real need to come out of third gear. Gets caught napping. And in all fairness to Cunha, it's an absolute exceptional finish from him, to be fair. But it just goes to show that it only takes one mistake and 10 seconds and you are punished in the Premier League. And it doesn't matter who you're playing against, whether it's a team at the bottom of the league, as I said earlier, or a team at the top of the league, you will be punished. And if it's a team at the top of the league, a Manchester City or a Liverpool, the mistake in the first half gets punished, the mistake in the second half gets punished. All of a sudden, it's 2-2, you drop 2 points, and it's a completely different type of game altogether. So we really, really need to do switch on in those areas. I'm sure Alexander Zinchenko will be spoken to, as I said, and these things will get ironed out. We just need to see a little bit more focus throughout those 90 minutes. And it could even be an element as to why in that sort of I'd say in the last sort of 5 or 6 games, obviously it's been Tomiyasu and Zinchenko playing as fullbacks in the last couple of games. But prior to that, we saw Ben White playing at right back and Tomiyasu playing as a left back ahead of Alexander Zinchenko. So maybe this needs to be a bit of a wake-up call for Alexander Zinchenko. And I think looking back at my notes, there are only probably 2 more things that I want to talk about before we go into player ratings. And that is, first of all, we need to look at there were 2 VAR decisions yesterday. In my opinion, they're both very fluffy. Thankfully, VAR did not take the headlines yesterday. It could have easily have been the case. There was a cross in the second half. We'll talk about that one first, because it's probably the easier one of the 2, which hit, I think it was Gabriel in the chest, and it came at such a pace. Gabriel, obviously, hands by his side. I think his hands behind his back, actually. Hands by his side and behind his back. It happened so quickly, and it was checked for potential handball. But that check was done very, very quickly, all done and dusted. And when you look at it in slow motion, you can quite easily see that the ball does hit his chest, and there are no questions, no debates as to whether or not it even comes close to hitting his arm, unlike the Newcastle call in midweek against PSG. And as harsh as I feel the decision was, what goes around comes around. So Anywho, the other VAR decision is the one I want to talk about, which also happened in the second half. It was, I believe, Kilman holding on to Gabriel Jesus' arm for a cross that came in from the right-hand side. Now, the reason I want to talk about it is for a couple of different reasons. First of all, you have to say, taking all of the context out of it in terms of what was going through Gabriel Jesus' head, which is what I want to talk about second, taking out that context, the actual coming together, the pulling of the arm or the not so pulling of the arm from Kilman on Gabriel Jesus, was it enough to constitute him going down the way he did? Was it enough to stop him being able to throw himself at that ball, make a connection, and put the game 3-0? Do I think that was the case? No, I don't. I genuinely don't, because first of all, Arsenal players didn't kick up enough of a fuss. And for me, there was nowhere near enough contact or enough of a pull, shall we say, on Gabriel Jesus to constitute a penalty and to constitute the referee making an obvious error. So for me, it wasn't a penalty. And so that's not the reason I wanted to talk about this particular VAR opportunity. And I can see here in the chat as well, we've got Rancid Pumpkin saying that in his opinion, it's not a penalty. And I completely agree. I do not think it was a penalty whatsoever. And again, like I said earlier, I'm not the sort of guy that will come on this channel and rant and rave about players. I'm not here to rant and rave and have a go at Gabriel Jesus. But for me, and it was something I talked about with Keith, who is often on the channel yesterday during the game, what I was a bit confused about is I understand why Gabriel Jesus has gone down. Obviously, he's felt contact and he has felt that in his head, it was enough to maybe win a penalty. But for me, it wasn't like he had grip of his arm in a way where it didn't look like he could move. So was it enough to stop Gabriel Jesus throwing himself at the ball to make sure that there was a third goal? And that's the question I want to pose to you watching either live or back as a video. You know, what do you think was going through Gabriel Jesus' head at that particular time? Because you would like to think that regardless of whether or not you're going to win a penalty, if you can make connection with that ball and put your team 3-0 up, you make connection with that ball and put your team 3-0 up. That there's no question of that at all whatsoever. So that's the element that I want to understand a little bit more, is what was going through Gabriel Jesus' head to think that going down was potentially the better option. Maybe he thought he couldn't get there. Maybe he thought he was a little bit late in throwing himself at the ball. And maybe he thought, right, I'm not going to get this for whatever reason. He's felt a bit of contact and thought I'd go down. Maybe that was going through his head. I don't know. But I just wanted to understand, and I wanted you guys' opinions on this, because, as I said, I definitely don't think it's a penalty whatsoever. It's not the reason I wanted to talk about this. I wanted to talk about it because I wanted to understand Gabriel Jesus' thought process in going down. Like, what do you think it could be? You know, what was the reason for going down? What was the reason for not getting to the ball? Those are the things that, you know, I wanted to understand in this particular phase of play. Chippy Boy also saying not a pen, and I think, yeah, we all kind of agree, don't we, that we think it wasn't a penalty. I'm just trying to, whether or not you guys can remember the clip exactly in terms of, you know, how it unfolded. Maybe go back and watch it and come back and put a comment in the chat with regards to this particular phase of play, because I was just a little bit confused, because I don't think it was a penalty. We and you guys watching, none of us think it's a penalty, but you just have to ask the question, is it because Gabriel Jesus doesn't think he's going to get to the ball and he goes down and trying to buy a penalty? You know, what is the thought process? I'm just trying to understand, really. I don't want to talk about it anymore because I feel like I've banged on about it for about 10 minutes now. So Rancid Pumpkin coming in here saying, to be fair, the ref called a similar penalty in the Manchester derby. And I think this is sort of not this particular opinion, but going off topic slightly here, is obviously we don't think it was a penalty, but I'm sure there might be Arsenal fans out there that do think it's a penalty. And I think one of the biggest issues that we have in the Premier League at the moment is consistency in refereeing decisions. And excuse me, what we want as fans, And obviously, it's different referees and different VARs every week and different games, different fixtures and whatever else. But what we want as fans is consistency. If it's a penalty in one game, why isn't it a penalty in another game? Or if it isn't a penalty in one game, it shouldn't be a penalty in another game. And, the fans on the receiving end of a poor decision will think, well, it shouldn't have been a penalty because, in other games it wasn't. And that's the consistency we want across the Premier League. So frustrating to say the least. And like I said, thankfully, VAR wasn't at the forefront of any headlines in this particular game. A judge coming in and saying not a pen. So yeah, another person saying it's not a penalty, which is obviously nice to see that we're all sharing the same opinion. But I think he wanted to fluff it a bit and try and get a pen, or had an outbreaking of learning herpes like me. Yeah, it was as if he was caught in two minds as to whether or not he wanted to really throw himself at the ball. My only way to make heads and tails of why he kind of went down in the way that he did is that maybe he did feel as though he was a little late to get into that ball, and genuinely didn't think he was going to get there. Felt the contact and then went down. But in real time, it did genuinely look like that if he'd thrown himself at it, he would have got there. And considering he was like 4 yards out from goal, probably only needed to get it on target and it would have been 3-0. Rancid Pumpkin coming in here and saying the refs in this league are crap. Give them a chance to make a wrong call. Absolutely. So, okay, I think just before we go on to the final point from this game, and it's not a massive talking point, it's more of a concern, really, and I'm sure a lot of you will probably share this concern as well, is there is a poll in the chat for the Arsenal man of the match between 4 players, and if memory serves me correct, I think it's between Odegaard, Saka, Tomiyasu, and I can't remember the 4th player. So I'm sure one of you will remind me. Make sure you get your views in the chat on who you think the man of the match was yesterday. I'm about to get it up on screen now because I can't even remember the poll on my own channel. How bad is that? There we go. Yeah, Odegaard, Saka, Rice, or Tomiyasu. So make sure you get your views in on who you thought the man of the match was yesterday for the game. Final comment, actually, just before we move into the final point of the match analysis, is refs have never been consistent before, even before VAR was the same from the 1960s. Yeah, do you know what? It's absolutely true. I just think that what's happened here with regards to fans, pundits, and professionals talking about referees and the PMOGL or whoever else is VAR has just thrusted it into the limelight even more than it was before, because it was implemented to make the bigger decisions easier and take the element of error away to some effect. And, previously, because there was no VAR, everyone would kind of blame the human factor in a way, which was a lot of the excuses that we heard at first with VAR. They're human, they're open to, making bad calls and blah, blah, blah. But we now have the element of being able to pause the game and look back at things as much as physically possible. And I think when the decisions are the wrong decisions, when that happens, it's just thrusted into the limelight even more than it was before. And I can see a few comments coming in the live chat as well with regards to who we think the Arsenal man of the match is. Chippy Boy saying always Rice. What a Rolls Royce he is. He's such an exceptional buy. No one talking about his price tag now, are they? And Judge saying Saka for me, but quite rightly a tough one indeed. And a big hello to Daniel Knight, who has just joined us as well in the show. We've been discussing things for around about 40 minutes now, Daniel. So please do go back and check out the earlier parts of this show. Some great talking points indeed, to say the least. And just before we jump into player ratings, and I do want you guys to let me know who you think scored what out of 10 once we jump into that in just a moment. But Tomiyasu is who I want to discuss next. He's been absolutely influential in the last 3 or 4 games since displacing initially Zinchenko on the left-hand side, and now Ben White, who deservedly needs a rest on the right-hand side. He was brought off yesterday in the second half. I think it was on around, I can't remember which minute it was in now. I'm going to quickly check. It was 79th minute in the game. He came off as a substitute, which was another calf issue. Now, we do know that in that first season, Tomiyasu started his Arsenal career really well. That was the year when Ben White was playing as a centre-back. Tomiyasu was playing as a right-back. Huge upgrade on what we'd had previously. And then he had his first calf issue. Looked like he was going to come back from injury. And then he got another calf issue with his other calf. And I don't know if it was maybe adjusting to the Premier League or whatever the reason was. And he ended up being out for a really long time. And when he eventually became fit again, he was pretty much out of the side for most of the rest of the season, not due to injury, just due to, form, fitness, and how everyone else was playing at the time. And he slowly worked himself back into this Arsenal side. And you have to say he's in absolutely excellent form at the moment. And you can certainly see why he initially came in on the left and displaced Zinchenko and has eventually displaced Ben White on the right, who it could be a form thing, it could be a rest thing, we don't know. Whatever the reason is, Arsenal have got depth and I welcome it. It's great for competition. But what concerns me is it looks like he's gone down with another calf issue in the 79th minute. And Arteta didn't really have too much to say about it after the game. Obviously, it's very fresh. They're going to take him away for scans and assessments and God knows whatever else. And we'll see the eventual longevity, if there is, of the injury in the course of the next few days. And I do think that he will probably miss the Luton game midweek. Why risk him? I do expect not heavy rotation, but I do expect rotation midweek against Luton. So I just wanted to not really talk about it, but just sort of bring it up. I'm sure a lot of you guys in the chat are probably sharing a similar feeling of sort of concern, given how influential he has been and how good he has been down that right-hand side. Yeah, Rancid Pumpkin saying TT going to the next level. Absolutely. That is a answer to a different question in the chat, which we'll come back to in just a moment. If you get injured in this team, you have to fight your way back in. Yeah, and you know what? When you look back at Arsenal teams of old who have fought for Premier League titles, there has always been competitions for places due to the quality in depth. And that's exactly what you get in this Arsenal side now. Absolutely spot on. Tomiyasu evolving slowly. Absolutely, yeah. When he first came into this side, he was an out-and-out fullback, very defensively minded. And now he's having to adapt to learn how to play as an overlapping fullback, which is probably the role he was most used to prior to signing for Arsenal. He's now learning to play as an inverted fullback on that left-hand side. All sorts. Absolutely all sorts. Absolutely. So Daniel Knight said, there's going to be lots of games in December. And it's kind of one of those reasons why I am a little bit concerned about this particular potential injury is you'd love to have someone like Tomiyasu available alongside the other options we already have at right and left back. And there's going to be a need for lots and lots of rotation throughout the month of December. I think, thankfully, now, off the back of 2 wins, we can, with all due respect to Luton, look to rotate slightly. We can't go into that game looking at them as disrespectfully. We have to have focus and concentration of getting the job done against Luton. But you'd like to think we can rotate a little bit before heading into that game against Aston Villa, which is a huge game. And then we've got a game in the Champions League again midweek, which we will rotate in because we've already qualified as top of the group. So we've got a little bit of breathing space, maybe compared to some other teams in the Premier League. Daniel Knight earlier asked a question of who would you say is better, Jude Bellingham or Declan Rice, which is what Chippy Boy had said, different types of players. It's a really difficult question. They are slightly different players, if you ask me, in the sense that Declan Rice, whilst he does drive forward as an 8, he's more of a defensively minded 8 when he plays as an 8, but he's more of a 6, generally speaking, whereas Jude Bellingham has developed into more of an attacking 8 or a 10 in the role that he has played for Real Madrid now in comparison to the role he played at Dortmund. Very different players now compared to what they used to be. As an England fan, I am super duper grateful that we have both of those guys playing at the base of our midfield. Well, maybe not the base of our midfield, but just generally speaking in our midfield going forwards. So let's have a look at the player ratings for yesterday. I need to bring it back up so that we can have a look. Where are we? Perfect. So we have got the Arsenal 11 on screen now. Let's start with the defenders and the goalkeeper. Apologies if you can hear my dogs barking in the background. So David Raya yesterday wasn't called into action too much, as we already established. He only had to, I think, only 3 shots on target in the end. Obviously, that means having made 2 saves, one of which ending up in a goal. But some really, really good stats from David Raya yesterday. Weren't called into action too often, as I said, just the 2 saves that he was having to make in this game. For score here, giving him a 6.7 rating out of 10. I would probably say that that's a fair rating. Not because he played poorly. Just one thing I need to explain is just because someone gets a 6 out of 10, it doesn't mean that they played poorly. It might mean that they weren't really called into action or didn't really have much to do. So there isn't too much to judge the player on as such. So I would certainly give David Raya a 6.5 out of 10. The 2 saves that he did have to make, quite comfortable when he was asked to catch the ball from crosses and corners, done it quite comfortably. And you can't really take anything away from the goal that was scored by Cunha. Absolutely exceptional finish from the Wolves lad up top. Next up, we have Takahiro Tomiyasu. Played 79 minutes, as we know, came off in that second half. An all-round solid game. That's now 3 assists in his last 2 appearances. Solid defensive stats here, winning 6 out of 10 duels, 5 tackles, 1 interception. Some really, really solid passing stats as well. And obviously coming out of the game with an assist. For score here, giving him a 7.4 out of 10. What do you think? Is that a fair score, 7.5? Does he deserve a slightly higher rating? I think personally, Takahiro Tomiyasu should probably get maybe an 8 out of 10. 7.5 would be a bit of a push. But personally, I would look to give him, maybe between a kind of a 7.5 to 8 out of 10. He was really influential throughout the game on that right-hand side. And for those of you who watched the video from the very beginning, when we looked at where Arsenal really looked to hurt Wolves on that right-hand side, using those wide rotations, Tomiyasu coming on the overlap, Tomiyasu coming on the inverted side of things, coming in as an inside forward at times, being part of that 3 or 4 on that right-hand side, really, really influential, not just in this game, but also against Lens as well. So for me, he would get somewhere in the region of a sort of a 7.5 to an 8 out of 10. We've got William Saliba up next as well. It's a difficult one with the 2 centre-backs because Arsenal only really faced the 3 shots. In terms of possession, if we have a look here, as mentioned already, where has possession gone? Yeah, they had 43% possession. A lot of what went on in the game was in the opposition half. So they weren't really called into action too much. And when he was called into action, you can see here, it's very unlike William Saliba to not be involved in any interceptions or any tackles, only involved in 3 duels in total, winning one of them. And sometimes they say that it's not about having to dive into tackles and that kind of thing. It's all about how you read the game, which makes you a good defender. And maybe this was very much the case with William Saliba yesterday, just really looking at reading the game and putting himself into good positions. And like I said, with David Raya, sometimes having a low rating of around a 6, which is probably a fair number to give him, isn't because you've had a bad game. It's sometimes because you haven't really had much to do. And I think this was certainly the case with William Saliba yesterday. When he was called into action, he did what he needed to do, but he wasn't called into action too often, which in my eyes is a good thing. And probably the same with Gabriel Jesus, who was certainly involved a lot more in the game compared to William Saliba. I think a lot of teams have identified that when Alexander Zinchenko does play as a left back, that's where the space is going to be. that's where teams can look to hurt Arsenal, which means that you see a lot of diagonal balls and a lot of long balls coming down Arsenal's left-hand side or the opposition's right-hand side, which means as that 3, Gabriel is called into action maybe a little bit more often than Saliba at times. And Chippy Boy does make a very good point, actually, about Saliba. And I completely forgot, if I'm honest with you, he did get booked. So that might be one of the reasons for why SofaScore has knocked his rating down just slightly. But yes, Gabriel Jesus got a 7.5. Looks like he was certainly called into action a lot more, maybe for some of the reasons that I just mentioned with regards to how Arsenal set up and how opposition teams look to expose Arsenal. 1 tackle involved in 7 duels, winning 6 of them, something that we've often come to see from Gabriel Jesus. Passing completion of 85%, even involving himself in a key pass. 3 long balls completed as well. All round 7, a solid game, and I think a 7 would be a good score for him. Alexander Zinchenko. For me, he gets a 6. It's a really easy one for me. Yes, he was involved in some really, really good passages of play for Arsenal. He got himself an interception, a tackle, winning 4 out of 8 duels of 50%, pass completion at 95%, which is no surprise. His passing is absolutely exceptional, and one of the reasons why he inverts into a double pivot, the way he breaks the lines, is just absolutely unreal. So no real surprises there with his pass completion. But as it says, errors to leading to a goal, 1. That could have quite easily have been 2. And for me, I'm going to give him a 6. We've got Leandro Trossard, who started the game for me really, really, really well. Don't forget to get your ratings in the chat as well. We're seeing some come in for each player. We just had the first one come in for Alexander Zinchenko, 6.5. Yeah, hard to disagree. I gave him a 6. 6.5, also very, very fair as well. Leandro Trossard, as I said, yeah, he started the game pretty well. But for me, as I mentioned earlier on in this show, for those of you who have been around since the start, not maybe the chance that he missed in the first half, but there were a few occasions in the second half where he was holding on to the ball a little bit too long. He was a little bit indecisive with some of the passes that he was making, and he was caught out in possession. And there were a couple of opportunities where he could have maybe pulled the trigger a little bit sooner to work the goalkeeper. So I think for me, SofaScore have given him a 6.7. It would probably be somewhere in the region of around a 6.5 to a 7 for me with Leandro Trossard. And you look at his stats here, 80% passing completion, key pass. He's had a couple of shots throughout the game as well. Really, really good, involving himself in those 11 duels. He really helped in that Arsenal press at times, hence the reason he was involved in so many. So yeah, I'd say around about a 6.5 to a 7. And we've got a 7 coming in here from Rancid Pumpkin. We've also got a 7 coming in here for Judge, and some earlier results from Chippy, 5.5 for Zinny, and also another 6 here for Zinny from Judge, and a 6.5 for Leo Trossard. So yeah, I'd say around about a sort of 6.5 to a 7 is a fair result. We've got Declan Rice up next, who was given a 7.3 rating from SofaScore. Is probably around about right. Before I even look at the stats, I would probably say he was somewhere in the region of around a kind of 7.5. Really bossed that midfield. When Wolves did attack, he broke things up nicely. His positional play was really good. Got himself in and around the edge of the box to even have a few cracks at goal, which is quite nice. I'm just waiting for the day that he scores an absolute screamer from around sort of 25, 30 yards. Cannot wait for that day. Similarly, how we have to wait for Thomas Partey to score one. It would be nice. Can you imagine he gets it against Spurs as well? That would be awesome. Anywho, 92% passing completion, 99 touches, are very much involved in everything Arsenal was doing. In terms of duels, winning 3 out of 5, 5 interceptions, 2 tackles, 3 clearances. So from a defensive point of view, absolutely solid, and only dribble past twice. So yeah, I'd say around about a 7.5 for Declan Rice is around about fair. And we've got an 8, a 7.5, and a 7.5 coming from the chat. All really, really, really fair. And then the Arsenal Man of the Match, which was awarded on the Arsenal website, Captain Odegaard, as some call him. Real all-round solid performance. Another goal to round off a really, really good vein of form. People calling him into question at the start of the season. Well, not at the start of the season. He started the season really well. Then he went off the boil a little bit, and now he seems to be back. The Odegaard that we've come to love and see. And that goal he scored yesterday, somewhat of what is becoming a trademark finish, arriving into the box late or being able to finish the ball in and around that 18-yard box. Exceptional player. 9.2 rating, and also given man of the match on SofaScore as well. I would probably give him around an 8.5 to a 9 rating, 89 passing completion, 98 touches, very similar to Declan Rice, very much involved in the game. 2 long balls completed. Didn't win any of his ground duels, but he is the guy that sets the tone for Arsenal's press. You can constantly see him waving players forward as well. Only dribble past twice. But yeah, it's all about what he does for Arsenal in an attacking sense. 6 key passes. 6 key passes. Absolutely exceptional stuff from the Arsenal captain. Gabriel Martinelli up next on the left-hand side. A constant nuisance to the Wolves back line. Really unlucky not to get himself a goal in this game, hitting the post in the first half, which would have, you would think, really have finished off Wolves. Another player that started the season quite slowly, but he seems to have come into that vein of form that Arsenal really need at the moment. The same kind of player that we've seen from last season, getting a 7 rating on SofaScore. No assists, unfortunately. We can see here there were a couple of blocks, really, really direct, which is what we want to see. 1 key pass, 93 passing accuracy as well, and winning 1 out of 5 duels. From a defensive point of view, nothing to really talk about. They gave him a 7. I think that's probably a fair score, if you ask me. And in the chat, we've got an 8.5 for Odegaard from before. I'm not too sure if I brought that one up. 7.5 for Martinelli and a 6.5. I think, yeah, both of those, to be honest with you, are really fair. They said 7. I agreed with their 7, but yeah, quite easily could have been a 6.5 or a 7.5. Gabriel Jesus was only given a 6.5 in this game. I think it was maybe a little bit higher, maybe around about a 7.5, just because of how much of a nuisance he was to those Wolves defenders. He was involved in both goals, although he wasn't credited with the assist. It was the pass before the assist that really opened up both teams for the goals. He was an absolute nuisance, bringing everyone into the game. And he had a couple of shots, as you can see here. 91 passing accuracy, involved in those duels. So for me, I would say he gets at least a 7, maybe even a 7.5, just because of how much of his involvement in those first 2 goals. And we've got a 7, a 6 coming in from the chat for Gabriel Jesus, and an earlier score of a 7 from Judge for Martinelli. And finally, to finish off today's live show, we have Bukayo Saka, who now has 18 goal involvements across all competitions, 19 appearances. Some even question whether or not he could do it in the Champions League this season and raise his status to a world-class player. I think he's answered that question as the leading goals and assists player in the Champions League this season as it stands. But that's not what we're here to talk about. Obviously, he picked himself up a goal yesterday, kicking the action off to make it 1-0 to the Arsenal star boy himself. 84% passing completion, 84 touches, 3 successful crosses out of 6. Same for long balls out of 4. He was involved in 16 duels throughout the game, completing successfully 8 of them. Very much involved in everything that Arsenal did well yesterday. Going back to what I said earlier on in this show, everything that Arsenal done well down that right-hand side came through Saka, an area that Arsenal had clearly highlighted to expose Wolves, and he executed that plan exceptionally, in my opinion. They've given him an 8.2. I would easily give him a rating of between 8 to 8.5 for this game. So it's very much between Martin Odegaard and Bukayo Saka for man of the match. So if you haven't yet decided, before I end today's show, make sure you do get your vote in on who you think Arsenal's man of the match is or was. At the moment, Odegaard leading by 80%, by quite some distance. Declan Rice in second place with 20%. So it does seem as though a lot of you guys watching would agree with who officially was handed the Arsenal man of the match yesterday. So that is probably going to about wrap things up for today's live show. If you do have any final questions, get them in the chat now before I wrap things up. We will be doing, I promise we will be doing an instant reaction analysis and player ratings after the game against Luton. We're looking at probably around sort of 10-15 minutes, after kickoff. Keep an eye out on the channel because I will be going live to discuss all things Arsenal yet again, just like today, going through all the important key moments, all the analysis, the stats, key players, player ratings, you name it. We'll have it covered straight after the game against Luton. But as I said, if you have enjoyed today's live show, do hit that like button. It really does help me out and gets it out into the algorithm. Subscribe if you're new around here so you don't miss out on any future live shows as well. But for now, that's going to about wrap things up for me. Thank you all very much for tuning in, sharing your opinions, sharing your questions. Hopefully I see some of you again. But for now, I'm JC, and I'll catch you in the next one. Stay safe, take care, and come on, you Gunners.